Hi everybody, Lauren Carpenter here with FantasyPros, and today we're going to be talking about our top 10 wide receivers from our FantasyPros expert consensus rankings for half-PPR formats. Number 10, Keenan Allen. Things didn't look great for Allen heading into last year with a run-first scheme and Tyrod Taylor at the helm for Los Angeles. But the situation changed quickly with Justin Herbert behind center, and Allen turned out to be a steal in fantasy drafts. He saw a whopping 147 targets in just 14 games and tied a career high with 8 receiving touchdowns. With Herbert at quarterback, Allen's ceiling is high and his target volume keeps his floor and consistency right where you need it for fantasy. Allen may not give you a ton of yardage, but he's a wide receiver 1 in both half and full PPR formats. Number 9, Michael Thomas. It feels like everyone wants to dismiss Thomas entirely because of one down, injury-plagued year, even though he was the consensus number 1 wide receiver in last year's drafts. Yes, Drew Brees is gone, but his arm wasn't as strong as it used to be, and Thomas had 30 catches for 343 yards in 4 games with Taysom Hill under center last year. And if the Saints quarterback is Jameis Winston, then you know there will be plenty of pass attempts and more downfield work for Thomas. Either way, he should produce as a wide receiver 1 if he's healthy for the whole season, so have little hesitation about drafting him as such. Number 8, Justin Jefferson. Jefferson was barely involved in the first 2 weeks of last year, and thus ends the negative things you have to say about his 2020 season. He put up an absurd 70% catch rate on 125 targets with a 15.9 yards per reception total and finished as the wide receiver 6 in half-PPR formats. With Adam Thielen starting to decline, there's every reason to buy that Jefferson can once again have an elite season. You'll need to pay a premium for him in drafts, but it will be worth it. Number 7, DK Metcalf. Incredible memes and Olympic sprinting trials aside, Metcalf had an outstanding season last year. He ranked just 14th at the wide receiver position in targets with 124 and 17th in receptions with 83, but he totaled over 1,300 yards with 10 touchdowns. Metcalf's combination of size and speed makes him nearly impossible to cover on deep passes. In fact, according to Pro Football Focus, he leads the NFL in yards, deep receptions, which are receptions on balls that traveled 20 or more yards in the air, and touchdowns against single coverage. The Seahawks likely will continue to lean into the run, and the addition of Dwayne Eskridge may take away some targets, but don't overthink it. Metcalf is a locked-in wide receiver 1 for fantasy with little downside. Number 6, A.J. Brown. One of my favorites. While Brown may no longer get the 180-plus targets we were hoping for him this season, he's still a top-tier fantasy option after the addition of Julio Jones. Brown dropped a few spots in ECR after the Titans added Jones, but there's no reason to fade him this year. For the second consecutive season, he was elite in yards per route run at 2.65, which is nearly identical to his 2.67 mark from 2019, and that's one of the stickiest and best stats to use to predict future performance. Even if his target share and targets per game don't improve as we thought they would before the trade, he'll remain a strong fantasy asset and a wide receiver 1. Number 5, Calvin Ridley. Ridley was a wide receiver 1 before the trade of Julio Jones, but he's certainly locked in now. He saw 31% of the targets in games Jones missed last year, and there's little reason to expect that share to decrease this season. Arthur Smith's scheme may not rely on the pass as much, but the increased number of targets should offset the decrease in overall volume. Given that Ridley saw 26 red zone targets, second most in the league last year, he should continue to score plenty of touchdowns and put up a likely top 5 fantasy season at the wide receiver position if he can stay healthy. Number 4, DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins saw 160 targets and a 29% target share in his first year with Arizona, and finished as the 5th best wide receiver in fantasy in half-PPR formats. It wasn't a perfect season for the veteran, as he was somewhat inconsistent, being held to 55 or fewer yards in 7 of his 16 games and scoring just 6 touchdowns. But at least some of that inconsistency was due to Kyler Murray playing through a shoulder injury, but the simple fact is Hopkins saw fewer than 7 targets in just 1 game last year. The addition of Rondale Moore in the draft shouldn't have much of an impact on Hopkins, who will again command a dominant target share and be an outstanding wide receiver 1 again if healthy. Number 3, Stefon Diggs. Diggs had an incredible first season with Buffalo, leading the NFL in targets with 166, catches with 127, and receiving yards with over 1,500. He was also second behind only Devonta Adams in receptions per game. We've been waiting for years to see what an elite route runner like Diggs could do in an explosive offense with a strong-armed quarterback, and the answer was pretty definitive. There's no reason to let Diggs slip any further than the third wide receiver off the board in your fantasy draft in any format. Number 2, Devonta Adams. If you're planning on taking a wide receiver in the first round, you'd better make sure he's going to perform without question. Adams is that player, and he's performed as a wide receiver 1 in 22 of his last 41 games. That's 53.7%, which is historically very good, and it's a 3-year sample size. During that time, he scored fewer than 11.1 PPR points just 4 times, and one of those times was due to leaving early with an injury. As long as Aaron Rodgers is with the Packers, Adams will be a can't-miss wide receiver 1, so draft him accordingly. Number 1, Tyrique Hill. Hill had 23 red zone targets, third most in the NFL, but that stat is misleading. Why? Because pretty much every target is a red zone target for someone who is as fast as Hill and for someone who is in an explosive offense like Kansas City's. Want proof? Hill has 28 touchdowns of 40 or more yards over his last 4 seasons. 28! So long as Patrick Mahomes is the Chiefs' quarterback, Hill is going to be a dominant force at the wide receiver position. He and Devonta Adams are the 1A and 1B options at the position, and he's worthy of a first-round selection. And that's all we have for our top 10 wide receivers from our expert consensus rankings and half PPR formats. Thank you again so much for watching our video series, and make sure you're following us at FantasyPros on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram so that you don't miss out on any of the content that will be pumping out all year long.